Formula 604X, anti-radiation, part 1. This is the story of two scientists, Professor Fraser of England and Dr. Nash of the USA. They were working on a top-secret project which would involve a vaccine that could be used to immunize people against the effects of radiation. Their intercontinental phone conversations were detected by the fourth-dimensional spaceship Danason. Unseen by the human eye, the fourth-dimensional spaceship was hovering somewhere above the Atlantic. Now, the aliens were attracted to their work because their planet Ergon was on the verge of a nuclear war against a neighboring planet. So they desperately needed a vaccine to immunize their people against the effects of radiation. This was the reason why the two friends and scientists were separately kidnapped by the aliens and taken to their spaceship. Now, Captain Laurel, who was in charge of the spaceship, explained to the two friends the reasons why they had no other choice but abduct them. However, Captain Laurel also promised them that if in the 6 months that would take the spaceship to reach planet Ergon, which by the way was already racing towards it, now, if by this time they were able to produce an anti-radiation tablet that could be used to immunize his people against the effects of radiation, he would then personally take them back to planet Earth. The two friends and scientists became very sympathetic with the aliens and their plight. So they decided to fully cooperate with them. After about a month of extremely hard work with hardly any sleep, Professor Fraser and Dr. Nash finally cracked it. Big time. They produced the anti-radiation tablet that could potentially save the people of planet Ergon from total extinction. Captain Laurel was ecstatic. He gave the two friends the highest honor available to him, which was the freedom of the ship. Sometime later, the two friends went for a stroll in this sort of earthly Luna Park, only obviously thousands of years ahead. They were by now very popular and known to all in the spaceship. So the owner of the Luna Park offered the two friends two virtual reality journeys. One was a virtual reality journey into the center of the galaxy, which Professor Fraser accepted. The other one, which by the way was to be run the day after, was a virtual reality journey into the center of the atom, which Dr. Nash accepted. The young girl at the entrance gave Professor Fraser a friendly smile. She then guided him into the cockpit of this extremely small virtual reality spaceship. Suddenly, the tiny ship began to spin around itself, first slowly, but then considerably faster and faster and faster, so fast that it caused Professor Fraser to lose consciousness. Now he regained his senses at the sound of a supernova explosion. Now he felt the turbulence of the explosion and realized that the tiny ship was racing at an incredible speed. He saw two stars very close to each other coming towards him. A planet considerably bigger than Earth appeared near one of the two stars. Soon, the tiny ship was on a collision course with the planet. When eventually the tiny ship came in contact with the atmosphere, it slowed right down. Now, Professor Fraser noticed that the clouds, unlike those on Earth, were very well organized. Most of them were the size of a big house, cylindrical in shape. Soon after, the tiny ship entered a huge platform made of clouds, hovering about 10 miles from the surface of the planet. A perfectly shaped ball made of clouds about 2 meters in diameter rolled towards the tiny ship. Professor Fraser could clearly see a human-like shape inside the ball, pointing a device with an orange beam towards the tiny ship. Professor Fraser came to the conclusion that this was probably a mid-air refueling station. Suddenly, Professor Fraser felt a tingling in his head as the eyes of the alien locked with his. Clearly, the alien was trying to communicate with him telepathically. Now, he was correct, because soon after, a voice in his head said, "My name is Mika, and I welcome you to Planet Vero." Professor Fraser wanted to reply, but he had no idea on how to do it. The alien understood his dilemma and said, "It is really very simple. First of all, empty your mind of any thoughts whatsoever. Then, once your mind is totally and completely void of anything, look into my eyes and say loudly and clearly what you want to say." Now, Professor Fraser followed the instructions, and then he shouted at the top of his voice. He said, "Why do you live in the clouds and not on the surface of the planet?" "Because," replied the alien, "after the nuclear war, the air is still toxic. So we take all the nourishments that we need from the clouds." Before Professor Fraser could ask another question, the tiny ship gently moved away. The only thing that Professor Fraser could do was to wave the alien goodbye. Now, the heat while living in the atmosphere was so intense that it caused Professor Fraser for the second time to lose consciousness. When he eventually opened his eyes, the two stars and the planet were nowhere to be seen. Soon after, he found himself amid millions of galaxies, stars, and illuminated clouds. They were so close, he felt that he could reach out and touch them. But that did not last long, because soon after, all of a sudden, he found himself in total darkness. Now, Professor Fraser remembered reading somewhere that most astronomers believed that at the center of each galaxy there was a massive black hole. To make things worse, the tiny ship was heading towards it. Suddenly, the tiny ship began to shake and shudder violently. Professor Fraser had never felt so much fear in his whole life. He felt as though his heart was in his mouth as the tiny ship started spiraling down into the black hole. As he was going down, he saw his whole life flash before his eyes. At one point, he thought he could see some people around him doing all sorts of things. But then he came to the conclusion that it was only his imagination playing tricks on his mind, and that nothing of it existed. Suddenly, The voice of the young girl at the entrance came through to him. Professor Fraser, wake up. Your journey is over, she said. When he opened his eyes and saw the young girl in front of him, he jumped out of the cockpit and embraced her. He then looked at her in the eyes and said, "Young girl, you look wonderful." To be continued.